Greetings and welcome back. I'm joined today by the Renegade of Funk, who's a very interesting gentleman, by my account at least. I first discovered him when he had a discussion with the now internet defunct Tara McCarthy, and later on he had a discussion with JF, that is Jean-Francois, the I guess you could say blood sports expert these days. And he has a very interesting background and interesting thoughts on the world, and I think the most important and salient factor is that he's a very, very smart guy, and this, of course, feeds into a lot of it. So I will probably cease talking and ask him a bit of his bio and how he came to some of his stances, and maybe you could get started.
Sure. Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for that introduction. So I'll just really quickly go over a little bit of where I'm coming from. So I am a programmer based in Tokyo. I have a YouTube channel. I have a blog, which I assume you'll link at some point. And increasingly, I have a bit of internet notoriety from my interactions with some other YouTubers and social media people. Lately, these sort of alt-right personalities, in part because I've disputed and debated some of them on some of these IQ issues. Now, I have stood out as an anomaly in their community because I'm a black member of Mensa, and that's, makes their head spin, these dogmatists about IQ, apparently. But I also have a lot of interest in other issues, such as culture and society, gender issues related to a startup that I'm working with actually on marriage matchmaking. It's a whole other thing I can get into later. Short version is I'm a programmer based in Tokyo with a little bit of internet trouble these days, and it's nice to be talking to you.
So, on your first interactions with people, how are you received by your interlocutors? I know you spoke to both Tara McCarthy and JF. And
yes.
Would you say they were fair and balanced, or how did they deal with you?
So I've spoken with a few. For example, I actually know Black Pigeon Speaks in person. He lives in Japan.
Right.
And I've been drinking with him. And I know a lot of Japanese YouTubers, English-speaking ones, such as Nobita, the Find Your Love in Japan channel, and Yuta, that Japanese man Yuta. I had dinner with both of them a while ago. Random Yoko, the Trump girl. So I've been in these sort of weird circle of political YouTubers for a couple years now, a year and a change. And most of them are very nice people. I would say the same thing of Tara McCarthy and JF. They're both very alt-right sorts of people. And in my experience, the thing I give credit to them for is that unlike most leftist people, they're actually willing to have conversations about very controversial subjects. Civil conversations, even if they can be occasionally disingenuous or dogmatic or unwilling to concede areas where they don't have the most evidence, they're at least willing to have the conversation. And we can talk about this if you like, but in the last few years I have gotten interested into this subject, and it's this has been the only group of people I've been able to have good conversations with.
The subject being HBD, human biodiversity, maybe genetics, that sort of thing. Yeah. I think we talked about this briefly privately. I think that it's, I get labeled all kinds of things for acknowledging this. It's obvious that there are different human populations and that there are differences.
Right.
One thing that in the open people don't really seem to have too much dispute about is you look at sports performance, and it seems that the best athletes come from different geographical locations depending on what area we're talking about, be it weightlifting, gymnastics, sprinting, long distance running, etc.
Sure.
And nobody seems to have an issue with that. And I think it's probable, at least based on the data, that at least in terms of means, that there are differences in cognitive capacity, at least.
Not just cognitive capacity, but also behavior. It's not just necessarily IQ, which is a very polygenic trait. So there's a lot of things to track, and it's very difficult to study. But also, hormone levels and behaviors. There's the whole controversy around the MAO gene and aggression, supposedly more prevalent in blacks. But it's the idea that evolution would have affected these different populations in very obvious cosmetic ways and in physical ways, as we see with Olympic running and distance running, those kinds of sports. But it would not have had any effect on the brain. That seems improbable, I think, to most critical thinking people. That doesn't seem very likely. It does seem likely that there are meaningful group differences. Now, does that mean that it would apply to every individual? No, and this should go without saying, but it has to be said. Obviously, you still should treat people as individuals, but there are likely aggregate differences among populations.
Yeah, that's pretty much my view. I'm not, you can acknowledge these things and at the same time acknowledge that you might be the mean, but you might not be, depending on which population you come from. I mean, you're clearly not the mean for your population.
No, I've learned that. I learned that. That's why I've come to become interested in this issue. I joined Mensa in 2015. I took their MAT test. I took a few other standardized tests, including Wonderlic, and got like 4 standard deviations up. They said somewhere between 150, 170, whatever my IQ would be. It's not very precise once you get that high. You're just kind of ballparking it. But in any event, I started going to Mensa events, and I was always the only black person. American Mensa in general is middle-aged white guys, a lot of boomer guys. It's like maybe 1 out of 4 women or so, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5, something like that, are female, because again, there's a IQ, the bell curve for men and women is different, which I assume you know a little bit.
Yes.
Women are more clustered around the mean. So that's what made me interested in studying it. Like, why am I always the only black guy here? And that's what made me start reading about this issue and looking into the different causes.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to talk about these things in a fair and balanced way because the tendency, well, there are really 2 tendencies. And the one tendency is, of course, to say it's all nonsense and it's racist, et cetera, and it's completely unsupported. And the other tendency is to dogmatically run away with some of these mean projections and just and let it affect your view of the world in its entirety. I think,
dictate your worldview.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen that on. Yeah, I've seen both. Frankly, I've seen things like that on the alt-right. That I am not part of, but nobody believes me or cares. But whatever.
Don't worry, I get called a Nazi a lot, which is hilarious.
Yeah, and I've seen people in outright denial of human populations being at times distinct. It's some of these distinctions are minuscule, some are greater, and I think the main my view, having looked into the issue, is that as far as the data are concerned, the jury is frankly out on just how much these things actually matter, because it's just not very well studied, really, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, so as I said, it's polygenic, so there isn't any clear smoking gun. This gene, this IQ, or these genes, this IQ. It's not something that's clearly predictable. What we see from studies is that there seem to be connections among populations, and it really depends on how you define a population, whether you think there are 3 races or 120. I mean, that's really a difficult thing to classify in a way that people agree on. But I'm sympathetic, actually, to the view of typically people on the left that it's not a great idea to talk about this stuff. The thing is, right-wingers and people who are into free speech, libertarians, they want to be able to talk about anything. They want to be able to debate anything. But the problem is that people just are not nearly as rational as they assume. And the fear that coming out in the open with these IQ differences between groups and suggesting that it's biological, the fear that it will lead to discrimination, it'll lead to people treating each other poorly, is well-founded. I mean, it's just steeped in our history. And it may be somewhat utopian to think that, we should just be open about all this stuff and talk about all this stuff all the time. that might not be a realistic view, sadly. Or maybe I'm just being
I don't
pessimistic.
disagree entirely. I mean, because the problem, I've seen this with other issues too, that have elements of truth or what have you, is that people who are not, I'm going to be generous, good at thinking in general, not good at thinking. It's a bit of a euphemism. They take some data points or some events from history. They take that, and then it becomes this dogmatic worldview. It informs everything they do and say, and they're unable to look at things from a nuanced perspective and a balanced perspective. And so, I don't know if I'm sympathetic, but I understand. I always try to understand different perspectives, and I understand that fear that people could look at a bunch of data sets and say, well, there you go. This explains everything. Let's close the lid on this case and just move on. Unfortunately,
people just aren't nuanced enough. I mean, en masse, like the bulk of people aren't nuanced enough in their thinking to appreciate the difference between sort of, as Destiny put it in his debate with JF, the sort of the descriptive and the normative, right? The fact that there's evidence of differences in, say, allele presentation or certain traits, and then how do we interpret that? What follows from these differences? And what follows in the mind of sort of the nationalist right-wing side is we need ethnostates, we need to get rid of all the minorities, even though mathematically it doesn't really make sense. But that interpretation also isn't necessarily supported. And then on the other side, just pretending these things don't exist isn't really a viable solution because the differences manifest in different outcomes. And if we don't talk about the biological differences or the potential alternative causes, all that's left is discrimination. And so you have an endless campaign like the Starbucks controversy. You have this endless campaign of grievance mongering to try to explain why are we getting different outcomes? Why are we getting different outcomes? Why are we getting different outcomes? And I think the skepticism is partly warranted because the history of science is just a history of being wrong constantly. There's a good example of this is Cordelia Fine, I believe. Her book. She wrote a book called Delusions of Gender. She's sort of writing from a feminist perspective, arguing against meaningful biological differences between men and women in terms of behavior, not in terms of genitalia. Obviously, she's not stupid, but in terms of mental behavior and attitudes and beliefs, she's arguing that essentially men and women are the same behaviorally and mentally. And I don't really agree with that, and I think most people don't really agree with that.
There's no evidence for it.
Well, most people think that there are meaningful inherent differences in brains of men and women.
It's almost certainly true. Yeah.
Yes. I think the preponderance of the evidence is on the side of that. But she argues against this artfully. And one of the points she makes, applies to the HBD debate and genes and IQ, it applies to any scientific debate, is that in the past, sciences like phrenology were used to try to explain, were used to justify keeping women out of higher education and out of employment. These sort of debunked, old, foolish types of sciences were ways of explaining the natural inferiority of women, supposedly. And she brings up these kind of points a lot, that now the neurosciences are being used to justify these ancient prejudices. So we have to maintain a healthy skepticism. That's not to say that science today is not improved, obviously, from in the past. It is, I think.
As somebody who consistently finds himself caught in the middle in a lot of this, I would say that whilst I understand the left-wing perspective as well as the more right-wing perspective, the fact of the matter is that as more and more research is done, more and more will be discovered, be it gender differences or sex differences or differences between populations.
Right.
And to the extent that they're profound or not, well, that's going to be up to the people interpreting the data. But it's inevitability that more and more information will surface, and so
sure,
you can try to hide it and cover it, but what that leads to is a monopoly on the people who, or a monopoly on the information that certain people are investigating, in the sense that people end up in what I call these internet dark holes, where they're just circulating the same thing over and over, and they're the only ones talking about it. And
Well, yeah, I mean, there are other consequences to that too, and what you're describing is sort of the Metal Gear Solid 2 phenomena of too much information and everyone being in their little echo chambers,
Yeah.
which is one of the negative consequences of social media. Certainly, it's true. It's created a massive reality gap. People live in, they can't agree on facts really. But another consequence is that there's an asymmetry of information, scientific information and understanding, and you'll have some people who understand these differences and understand reality better, and you'll have other people who don't, and so you'll have more inequality. We've seen this as we've been better at sorting people by IQ. Actually, Charles Murray's most recent book covered this.
Yeah.
How with the end of aristocracy and sort of titles and the sort of arbitrary distinctions of class, now that we're better at sorting people based on IQ, if you're poor and you're smart, you'll probably get into a good school and it'll correlate with a greater livelihood, better than in the past it did. It's actually led to more inequality, not less. And this is really one of the big issues of our age.
I think it's the biggest issue I've actually talked about. I call it the Great Cognitive Divide. And this is a huge issue because there are people who deny the existence of IQ or even meaningful cognitive differences, not in terms of populations, but in terms of just individuals, that everybody is basically a blank slate. And I've had discussions, very frustrating discussions with people online where I said, well, do you think a guy with, you might not believe in IQ, with an IQ of 75 would be effective at understanding quantum mechanics? And I said, well, given enough time, and it just became this endless sort of argument, circular argument. I think this is a huge issue because as things, you have automation, and this is going to become a huge issue because there are a lot of people. Yeah. I mean, you're a lord of all things computer related. Most people can't do your job, frankly speaking, and as that job becomes very, very important to maintaining our infrastructure as a civilization, and peeling potatoes or mowing the lawn or picking up trash becomes less and less important. This is a big issue, a huge issue.
Well, I mean, the automation nightmare scenario of us losing 20, 30, 40% of our job situation, that's going to upend the entire social order. It'll be gradual, and smarter economies will prepare for it. We'll try to adapt to it in different ways, and it's going to require a change in value system. But it is something that we're going to have to address. It's one of the big paradigm shifts, assuming we don't destroy ourselves in the next century. But Jordan Peterson spoke about this as well. There's a good video where he talks about the army testing and how about 10% of people basically
15%.
15. Oh wow, that's getting worse than I thought. Don't have the ability to be trained to do anything economically useful in modern society. So what do you do with those people, right? They're not willing to just disappear. You have to figure something out, and as technology expands, that population may increase, and once they're large enough, they could become a threat. They could become a problem. So I don't have any pithy, quick, easy answers to it. I have some ideas about what needs to happen at a high level. We can dig into that if you'd like. I think, go ahead.
So in terms of the Great Cognitive Divide, the ever-widening gap, I have some ideas too, but let's say you were absolute dictator.
Okay, great.
So
favorite game.
Okay, you're the absolute dictator, and you're aware of this problem. It's a growing problem. How do you begin addressing it?
That's a fun question. So, well, one thing I'll say before I answer it is that another thing that this cognitive divide speaks to, and it's not, differences in intelligence, differences between men and women, differences between racial groups, all of these differences, what they really underpin is the kind of challenge to the basic liberal sacred cow. And when I say liberal, I don't necessarily mean left-wing. I mean classical liberalism, the idea of the individualized society that's been around since the 18th century. And that's one in which everyone is basically equal. Yes, there'll be some different outcomes, but basically everyone on their own can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and we should have roughly proportional outcomes, and everyone will be satisfied. It's challenging that narrative. that was reached its zenith really in the 60s and 70s with the civil rights movement, and people have been trying to force it into a greater reality since then. But now you're seeing more and more people challenging it openly, and that's kind of the intellectual dark web. That whole hoity-toity name thing is people starting to openly challenge this narrative of equality. And I think the real conflict is between equality and freedom, because you can't have equality of outcome and freedom. You can't, it's really one or the other. Now, on the question of cognitive divide and automation and how to not have a, mass revolt uprising, I think at a high level, the main thing is a change in the value system. We have to question the value system that says every single person needs to go to college, every single person needs to pursue a white-collar job, or every single person even needs to work. There's a class of people who, if they can't really be productive, we have to tolerate them doing other things with their time that aren't necessarily work. There are things that they can do that are valuable to society that they might not get paid for. And one example I've given before is that of homemakers, women who stay home with their kids. They don't get paid for it, but they do a very valuable job that's very important for the future of society and for communities and for having good neighborhoods. And so one thing that can take off some of the pressure of a shrinking workforce is encouraging more single income families. Restructuring the tax incentives, restructuring spending and benefits such that people have more incentive to form single income households. Because one job that I don't think we should automate is mom, right? Like, I don't think robots should be nursing kids and teaching kids and doing all of that. So if you maybe it's not the most feminist solution, but if you encourage a higher percentage of women or dads, if they want, to stay home and have one parent work, that can take some of the pressure off.
I mean, I tend to, I'm not here to offer pushback per se, and I'm pretty interested, but part of the issue was specifically with that issue of double income is that inflation is a real thing. And
Sure.
The dollar, let's just use the dollar as a metric.
Yeah.
The dollar today isn't the same thing as the dollar in 1958 or
no, of course not.
And so I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not some dogmatic Rothbardian or some kind of Austrian guy, but
Yeah.
it is true that purchasing power over time has decreased quite dramatically, and as a consequence,
No, of course.
it's very difficult for the single parent works, the other stays at home paradigm to work particularly well.
Yeah, it's harder than it was. I think objectively, it's harder than it was in terms of keeping up with the Joneses, the lifestyle people enjoyed in the 50s and 60s and before. The boomer meme of, hey, why can't you kids just walk across the street to the factory, get an entry-level job, buy a house and a car, and take care of your wife and kids? Like, why don't you just do that? That era, even though that wasn't really how it was, that era is long gone. But even in today's economy, it is possible to live on a single income. Plenty of people do it. Millions of people do it. And with some budgeting and some sacrifice and really a change in values, even an average worker can support a family. Can they have the latest PS4 games every month and unlimited data and all the bells and whistles? Maybe not, but they can. And so that's why the first thing I said is a change in values, is a less materialistic culture. A more concern with family and leisure time. And the way I think of it is, I think of like 19th century sci-fi, like Orson Welles and old school sci-fi from the 1800s, where their vision of the future, if you read that stuff, their vision of the future of like the year 2000 is a world where people had a lot of leisure time. And, automatons would do most of the work, and humans only needed to work 2 hours a week. And there was that notion in like the Jetsons. I believe George Jetson famously took care of his family and only worked at the sprocket factory at Sprockets for like 3 hours a day, twice a week or something like that. And that was the notion of the future. And I always thought that was super, super cool. Like, I don't want to work 90 hours a week. I would love to have more free time to spend with friends and family and writing and doing cool stuff. But now our value system has changed, where we imagine a future where robots do all the work, and it's a bad thing. We're terrified of it. We're terrified of a future where we don't get to all work, men and women, 90 hours a week while, our kids are in daycare. We're terrified that we might not get to do that.
I gotta say, as a child of the 80s, having seen the heyday of the Jetsons, that's not the only disappointing front. I mean, those flying cars, all the things that were promised, the flying skateboards from Back to the Future, all that stuff is...
the Robo-Nanny.
Well, I mean, it's a bit of a tangent, but that's a fascinating discussion in itself, that a lot of... I mean, basically we saw this immense growth in technology between the end of World War II and into the 70s, and then just stopped. And we're basically flying the same airplanes as we did 40, 50 years ago.
Sure.
And it's a question of whether or not we reach not a hard bottleneck, but a soft bottleneck in terms of how far we can push things, or...
Technological development.
Pardon me? In development.
Technological development.
Precisely. Or maybe the interest to push it just was sort of lost because, let's be honest, the profit-driven model doesn't necessarily, it can, but not necessarily, does not necessarily encourage innovation, because...
It doesn't necessarily, that's true, yes.
It could just be that flying the same 747s that we have for the past 40 years, well, in fact, I've studied this a bit, it is more cost-effective than looking into new aviation technologies. This is an example.
Right. Yeah, and this is an area where I've gradually lost faith. I mean, when I was younger, I was atheist, edgy, libertarian type. I read Ayn Rand, and I was into all that, and I thought the free market was the best thing in the world. But when you really study it, what really jaded me was working in Silicon Valley as a programmer and seeing where the money goes. You see these startup contests and accelerator programs and VC firms, and are they interested in really envelope-pushing, cutting-edge tech? No. They just want buzzwords. They just want you to say blockchain, machine learning, social, Uber, mixed with Netflix, and then they'll throw money at you. They're not actually interested in real challenging innovation in fields where we need it. Things like healthcare, things like energy, because it's not sexy, and there's a lot of opportunity to...
There's another critical factor there. I'm convinced that Cold War ideology was an immensely important factor in the drive behind pushing us to our technological limits, because the principle of MAD, mutually assured destruction, developed by John von Neumann, that gives you a sense of the imperative of the exigency of having to develop these things. If you don't, in theory at least, your enemy, your arch enemy, might do it, and then you're screwed.
There's a more basic thing, which is a cynical thing, but it's true, that most technological development across human history has been driven by war.
I agree.
It's been driven by warfare between tribes. That's what makes us come up with new stuff. So when the Cold War ended, one of the most hugest and existential conflicts, threat to all of humanity, once that ended, there was a gap in motivation in terms of state militaries. Now, there's still a lot of proxy wars going on around the world, but it's smaller scale. It's terrorist incidents, it's people driving buses into crowds, it's drone strikes. I'm not saying we need a nuclear war, but a larger threat would motivate some of the military spending. And things like NASA have also declined in funding and importance. NASA was huge in the 60s, and the public gained a lot of benefit from some of the ancillary and sort of trickle-down technologies that came from all the military spending and NASA spending.
And it's taboo to talk about. I mean, you're kind of a minor lord of Japan. I'm sure you're familiar with Unit 731. I don't know how much, if not, I can talk a little bit about it. Do you know Unit 731?
No, actually.
They were, so Unit 731 was a covert branch of the Imperial Japanese Army that engaged in some pretty shady activities in terms of human experimentation, chemical warfare, biowarfare. Cool. I don't know if they, this is beyond my knowledge, if they brought, because that's the thing, I think it's been covered up, if they actually brought fruitful results out of that. But even the idea that those types of highly unethical, immoral experiments, they did some horrible things, I mean, things that would really chill people to the bone, could bring fruitful results. The reality is without, as you pointed out, without conflict to drive people become listless, and they become contented with, was it Elon Musk who said, he I think it was Elon Musk, maybe it was somebody else who said, I'm paraphrasing because I'm old and tired, but if we dreamt of flying cars and going to Mars, instead they gave us 140 characters.
Right. That sounds like him. It is 280 now. So there's that.
Okay. So
that's
progress has been made. Twitter now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's very true. I agree with the general point you're making, though. I think the principle there is that cultural changes have slowed the rate of innovation for a number of reasons. And as you say, Unit 731, actually, this is something I actually have heard a little bit about this. I didn't know the name, but there was a news special a while ago that I saw that mentioned it. And the broader point is that in the past, people were willing to make more sacrifices. Now science is a lot more regulated, and now people don't have the stomach to do kind of more extreme things in order to push the envelope. We're hitting a lot of technological limitations around Moore's law, around software development. Software is not really keeping up with hardware, and I think the money hasn't really gone into the most dramatic and important fields, because capitalism, Silicon Valley, chases the closest dollar, chases the stuff that's going to pay off the quickest. So it's a combination of things. I'm not saying we need to have, again, nuclear war, that we need to have a command economy. That would be worse. But I think it's really the culture. We've sort of regressed culturally in a lot of ways.
I can't help but, it's a bit of a tangent, but on the point of Moore's law, as you are a lord of computers and software engineering,
yes,
there are people who are skeptical of that as a theory.
Of continuing.
Yeah. Do you think that Moore's law is valid and that we're heading to that?
When you say valid, you mean that it will end soon? So there's a few things that will keep it going for a little while.
Okay.
There's a few different trends. So one is changing the materials used to develop processors. There's some interesting things going on. There's experimentation with, let's see here, there's the photon gate thing. I forget what the material is called. Some sort of carbon-based material. There's graphene. There is... I read an article in Hacker News about this a while ago, but I forgot it. There's a more miniaturized technology for creating logic gates. There's also greater parallelization. That's another area where you can have more transistors in a similar amount of space. So there are some trends with processor technology and materials that can extend Moore's law into the next decade or two. And then there's also the theory of quantum computing, sort of breaking everything. I think the promises there aren't anywhere near the reality if you actually study it. But Moore's law will last for a while. It'll last probably another decade, depending on sort of consumer behavior. And beyond that may lie either a whole new computing paradigm, a whole new approach to processor design or computing as a concept, or it'll be a few years of software sort of catching up. Because as I said, software is not really caught up to hardware. And kind of the lay way to figure that out is looking at video games, right? Like video game graphics haven't really improved that much over the last 10 years.
I blame the consoles.
It's not just the consoles, being PC Master Race isn't the only reason.
But it is a reason. So, come on.
Yeah, it's one thing. It's not the only thing. As computers have gotten more powerful, games can be more detailed, they can have more sprites, they can have more internet things going on, but the actual quality of the graphics hasn't really improved that much because the software involved is extremely complex, actually generating models and hiring all the people. And until we I think the real killer app is going to be AI. Until we have stronger machine learning and artificial intelligence to do a lot of the complex software work for us, we're going to be behind in that field.
Yeah, interesting. But I completely agree with you that the profit-driven model is not the be-all and end-all. It's just that I'm skeptical of our ability to transmute the culture such that that model could at least be somewhat altered or at least modified, modulated. Because you see everywhere you look, that's that's the model. I mean, I've heard similar stories, by the way, from people I've known who worked in Silicon Valley.
Sure.
And
well, I mean, there are alternative models. You know, I think, and it's not necessarily good, but the thing to look at are places like China, right? So, you know, what they're doing with genetics, they're doing a lot of really cutting edge research. They have the stomach. They're willing to do awful things, and they may be ahead of the curve in genetic engineering and you know, social media surveillance type things. You know, they're doing a lot of military things that are concerning. They're building aircraft carriers, and so they have a mixture of capitalism and a command economy and quote unquote communism that gives them some advantages, partly massive population and a fairly high IQ population as well. But do we want to be China? You know.
Well, I've had literally this discussion with a Chinese American gentleman. I've said this separately that
sure.
It's a bit of a prisoner's dilemma because, as you pointed out, a lot of these are things that we were talking about are symptoms of liberalism, even classical liberalism. But the point I've made on my channel a number of times is that honor and principles and ethics only mean something if the person you're engaging with follows at least to some degree the same principles. But if China is willing to at least partially ruin some of its population on a quest to understand the depth of the human genome, and Americans and Europeans are not, that is a blockade and the question, a disadvantage, a blockade. Yeah, it's something that we need to have an open discussion about because some of these are our most cherished principles. But and this is an extreme example, but I remember the gentleman I had a discussion with said, because he came from a Chinese background, that the Chinese government would be willing to, if need be, kill thousands of babies to figure out, two genes in a massively polygenically complicated thing that leads to intelligence. But if they could figure out those two genes, it's worth it, right? We're not willing to do that.
No, we're not.
And I'm not necessarily endorsing that. I have, I have a lot of difficulty getting past certain, you could say, libertarian, classical liberal principles. I want to be fair to people. I don't want to inflict pain on them. It's a really hard question.
Right. Yeah. This is the history of science. A lot of the biggest breakthroughs have come through all kinds of awful practices and experiments. I mean, you look at some of the psychological testing and experiments done on people in the 60s and 50s, and before that, during World War I, chemical testing. We got all kinds of breakthroughs in various fields through doing terrible things to people. And if now we're too evolved and sensitive, then there is a potential cost in the rate of innovation when you compare it to a country that doesn't have the same scruples. Now, I agree with you. Does it follow that we throw away the scruples? Not necessarily. But it's something that we have to be aware of. And another broader principle is, at least with China, is that they understand something that the West doesn't really believe, which is that civilization is a team sport. It's not this kind of kumbaya, everyone just is a freely acting agent kind of multicultural vision. Most societies are ethnically homogenous, and most societies have very strong in-group preference. And this is something that Westerners kind of don't really understand. And if you have a very liberal, open society where everyone treats each other as an individual, that works if everyone subscribes to that. But if only some people subscribe to that and other groups don't, then the groups that don't, as you mentioned, are at a disadvantage because, they don't have the same sort of posse backing them up. And living in New York, I can give you a million examples of this. If you're a Chinese immigrant and you come to New York, you've got a whole community waiting to support you. You've probably got family
I grew
there.
up in New York, dude. I know the way New York works.
Of course. Right.
Yeah.
You know how it is. Yeah. Versus, and I see this in Tokyo as well. When Chinese immigrants come to Tokyo, they've got tons of support. They've got Chinese language resources. They've got credit agencies. They've got places to live. They have Chinatowns everywhere. Whereas if you're a white Western immigrant who comes to Tokyo, you're kind of on your own. You kind of got to work it out and figure out stuff on your own. And so this is another weakness of liberalism. It doesn't compete well. It does well economically, but it has all these negative side effects culturally.
This is almost, you could say an alt-right talking point. I don't necessarily think that making that observation is alt-right, but a lot of people would say, well, that's an alt-right talking point you're making.
What is that liberalism?
That most societies are ethnically homogenous, and
well, they are.
Well, I agree that de facto seems to have been the case for most of history.
Yeah, it's an evolutionary thing. I mean, humans are tribally based species. We have a lot of physical manifestations of that, like the white parts of our eyes allow us to infer the direction someone's looking, allows us to infer if a person's thinking or not. So it improves nonverbal communication. Other primates don't have this. We have very strong instincts toward protecting immediate family, and by extension, sort of immediate genetic family, people who are sort of related to us. And the way that we infer that is, by looking similar skin color, similar bone structure. So the earliest tribal groups and the earliest nations were all homogenous, and we're even now in 2018, we live in the legacy of that throughout Africa, throughout South America, throughout Asia. There's still default of ethnic homogeneity among most nations, and that's not going to change quickly, or it's not going to change by one or two countries or a few countries trying to pretend that the race doesn't exist, that ethnicity doesn't exist, because most people don't do that. Most people, their ethnicity is a fundamental part of their identity.
Yeah, I've made this observation too. It's a difficult. I don't know. You strike me as a bit of an individualist, sort of by nature, but
yeah, a little bit of both.
See, I am, for whatever reason, just a hyper individualist. It's not. It's just I feel like I was born that way. I don't really feel. Sure. I don't look at white people and think, oh, they're my people, or anything.
You don't have any kind of ethnic identity,
not really. People, I would broadly say I'm a cultural European.
Are you like Irish?
Pardon me?
Like Irish or something?
No, I'm a Euromut. I'm a kind of a mixture of Eastern European and Southern European stuff like that. But I mean, culturally speaking, I definitely am European, and that's more or less how I was raised. I think, and I mean, even obviously ethnically, I'm some type of Euromut. That's true, but it's. I don't have an obsession with associating with people like that per se, or my fellow Europeans. If the interests don't coincide, for example.
Okay, that puts you at a disadvantage.
Admittedly, I mean, fortunately for me, I'm not going to be getting married, and I'm not reproducing, so it's kind of a moot point. It doesn't really matter in my case much.
Well, nature is good at correcting problems, like problematic behavior, and I'm not trying to say that you're like a mistake or anything, but
I'm a freak. It's okay.
Yeah,
I'm a freak.
If your way of seeing yourself is not conducive to reproducing, then you won't reproduce and it won't be passed on. But the point I'm making, the broader point, like there was a New York Times article I read about this recently, about how fertility is going down in the United States, still in decline. And I remember seeing this on Twitter, and I just left a comment saying natural selection, saying, nature, low fertility is nature's very gentle way of weeding out unfit populations. And I got a lot of negative response, like, what are you saying? What are you implying? Like, Westerners are an unfit population? And I was like, yeah, they are. I mean, by definition, if they were fit, they'd be reproducing. They'd, be thriving. But the fact that they're choosing to slowly disappear is a sign of something wrong.
A small caveat: mere reproduction is not necessarily a sign of thriving. There are.
Well, you can reproduce too much. That's true. You can reproduce in a way that's destructive. Yeah. Right. So you have to reach some kind of equilibrium with the environment. So some people argue, for example, in Japan, that the reason why the population is slowly declining is because of density. Right. It's just too many people in too small a space. Now, I've written about this on my blog as well. That actually isn't really true, because the density of Japan is actually lower than the density of India. And India has a very high birth rate. So it's not necessarily the density itself. You have to look at the culture. You have to look at I guess, the ethnic makeup, to the extent that that's relevant to culture. And you have to look at, again, equilibrium with the environment. Are people thriving? And with humans, it's complicated because we have the ability to thrive in very, very dense populations. I mean, the population of Queens, for example, has areas where there's relatively high birth rate, and it's one of the densest urban populations in the world. And yet, if you walk around Queens, there's tons of parks, there's tons of open land, and it's a matter of how many tall buildings you have, basically, with the technology to make 200-story high-rises. So we could fit the entire population of the world into the state of Texas, and you'd have the density of roughly Queens. Leave the rest of the world as a big part.
Well, I mean,
so, sorry, go ahead.
No, as you know, maybe this is a good time to segue into the MGTOW stuff, or because you have this blog.
Sure. Yeah.
So Renegade of Funk, as he's interested in sort of gender relations and other things, and he's got this blog called Righteous Ruminations, and he had a post called 10 Hot Takes on MGTOW, and I think a good way is maybe to go through all the points he's making and discuss this.
Sure.
I think inevitably some people in the audience might be upset by your observations. I'm not very a passionate individual, so things don't really offend me or whatever. But
okay.
The first point you make here, and the title is MGTOW is logical. So if you want to go into the bit of detail on that, how is it logical?
Okay, yeah. So coming off of the whole demographics and future of civilization thing, just to tie that off, I mean, the basic point I was making is that people who have more of an ethnic identity have a stronger connection with the past and more of an interest in their future, more of an interest in their heritage. So if you're too much of an individualist, then you're kind of disconnected from your past and your future. You're kind of stuck in the present.
I mean, I agree with you, and yet I mean, I mean, for example, every day there are a bunch of, so I'm at least de facto Hungarian through nationality, and my family is, and every other day I walk past a bunch of drunken Hungarian alcoholics who live in my building.
Nice.
And it's great, and they're chain smokers too. And I walk past them, I just thinking, do they really? I mean, okay, they're the sort of the men of the earth types, I guess. I don't think they have a reverence for Hungarian culture in particular, and I'm sure many of them have popped out many babies. But again, I don't necessarily see this interest in the past or cultural interest manifested too much in populations that are highly ethnic necessarily.
There are exceptions, absolutely. I mean, if you look at, in Western countries, you look at group behaviors. But the point I'm making really is that civilizations overall, they have an advantage if they can do two things. If they can work collectively, and if they can work over very long time ranges. And this is one of the advantages that China has, right? They have a huge population that's very homogenous. There's minority groups, there's the non-Han Chinese and so on and so forth. But for the most part, they're culturally very homogenous. And they have a government that's decades old at this point, that's planning a century ahead and is willing to make very big sacrifices. And when you're able to do that, in terms of civilization, you have certain advantages compared to atomized societies where everyone just kind of does their own thing and there's no coherent value system. Now, let me just segue into the blog since you wanted to go over that. I did write this a couple months ago, 10 Hot Takes on MGTOW. At the very start, it does say that these are just sort of half-baked thoughts that I had, and they may be a little contradictory, but I had an interest in the movement because, as I mentioned, I have
first correction. MGTOW is definitely not a movement; it's an online phenomenon. I just have to correct for that.
Sure. That's fine. I mean, you characterize it however you want. But I became interested in it because I'm in a field in a startup that's related to marriage matchmaking. So there are populations in the United States and in Western Europe, around the world, in Japan, of men who are not really interested in marriage. So I wanted to look into why that's the case. So I started watching YouTube videos about it and reading a little bit about it, and the whole incel phenomena as well. It's sort of come into the news recently. And I wrote this post. So the first point, as you said, was MGTOW is logical. And what I meant there is that the people who become MGTOW, who identify as it, and then they give you their reasons are not bad. They're perfectly valid reasons. They talk about marriage laws not being equitable. They talk about how they don't want to risk losing their property. They talk about unfair domestic violence laws. They talk about lack of incentives. And a lot of that's true. A lot of that's just accurate. And so the question really is not, is there a reason to avoid marriage? Yeah, there's plenty of reasons to avoid marriage. The question for me is really what to do about it at the individual level and at the level of society.
Okay. That's point number one. I don't think many people would dispute that because those things are pretty obvious. Point number two, the issue is bigger than we realize. Yes.
So the point I made there is that there's a distinction between self-identifying MGTOW and de facto MGTOW. And the self-identifying group is a lot smaller, like a fraction of a percent of the population. They've got a pretty vibrant online community. There's a lot of forums, a lot of videos, particularly from Australia. I've noticed a lot of YouTubers doing it. But as part of the whole mass population, it's a relatively small group. But I think there's a much larger group of de facto MGTOW, people who don't call themselves MGTOW, but effectively are. They're men who have said, we're not interested in pursuing women, we have other priorities, and a large percentage of them are what I would characterize as sort of lower on the sexual marketplace hierarchy. These are guys who don't have a lot of options. SMV, right. These are guys that aren't attracting a lot of women anyway. They're struggling with employment, they're struggling because of globalism and mass migration, and they don't have the same status. They're in a culture that's more feminist, that's where women are working more, and so they're having trouble offering as much. And so they've sort of dropped out of the marriage marketplace and are just kind of doing their own thing. They wouldn't call themselves MGTOW. They've probably never heard of the term, but effectively they are.
Right. I mean, that the 80-20 rule, however much it applies to mating and reproduction. Yeah.
We're regressing in that sense. We're regressing in that sense to more of a tournament-style mating system. And the rise in single-parent homes is a sign of that. I mean, that's basically what tournament-style mating is. You have one alpha fathering children with several females, and they're all effectively single mothers. Now, in modern societies, we have governments and welfare agencies to sort of replace the father. But that's not a sustainable paradigm long term. It's going to lead to a lot of problems.
I think it's something that people have an unfortunate tendency to mischaracterize Homo sapiens as, in a binary sense, as either monogamous or polygamous. And the matter of fact is, we're whatever the environment demands of us to be.
That's true. There's a lot of examples of polygyny among tribes, among nomadic peoples, and kind of the R selection, K selection thing. There are environmental pressures that sometimes encourage more promiscuity, more reproductive sort of laxity because of, concern with the ability to have kids. But as I've written on my company's blog, monogamy is sort of the gold standard for civilization. If your goal is really a high civilization, arts, literature, technological development, you need to incentivize men to be involved in their children's lives and with their offspring.
Well, a lot of men would like to be, but as you know, they have a lot of forces tearing them away from that goal.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big problem, and it's a big problem with contemporary marriage laws, family court laws that seem to incentivize and reward women financially for tearing apart families. Divorce has become too cheap and too casual, among other legal issues. So I think the de facto MGTOW is a big issue, whether these guys consider themselves to be part of a community or not. The incel phenomenon, the ones who are voluntarily walking away from women or just can't attract a woman, that population is growing, and it's socially a problem.
Yeah, I've made several videos. I've had several discussions on that. That I've made the argument that and I'd argue that society or humans on a very basic level are less concerned about men's welfare than women's for obvious reasons. Women are the limiting factor in reproduction, and men aren't.
Right.
But pragmatically speaking, you can't long term not be concerned about these types of men and men in general because they're the biggest revenue providers. They're the ones who do the hard jobs. I mean, if men are checking out systematically and slowly but surely, that is a long-term problem that whether you care about them or not, you'll have to, at the very least in a pragmatic sense, address.
Yeah, it's not sustainable long-term. It's one of the reasons why polygamy can be disruptive as well. I mean, there's a theory that this is one of the sources of terrorism in the Middle East because you have polygamy normalized. You have a population of men who basically can never get married, and so they end up getting radicalized and joining religious extremist organizations that say, hey, blow yourself up and you'll get 72 virgins. So, with society, you have to think about incentives, and if you let this population of angry, disaffected men grow too large, you could end up with some kind of horrible correction, some kind of violent, civil war, revolution, that type of thing.
Okay, number 3. MGTOW is a good temporary solution for individuals, but a bad way to fix society.
Yes. This is one of the most important points because I think, MGTOW is a very diverse community. There's many different types of people that use that label. And as I mentioned in one of the later points, sort of the activist MGTOWs have very conflicting goals. They have very different visions of what MGTOW is going to do to society. So there are some MGTOW that don't really care about the wider society, about the larger social issue. And I actually mentioned this in one of my random thoughts posts. I don't have a lot of respect for people who take the position that they don't care about society, that society can burn, I don't care, I'm outside of it. I think that's an extremely childish position. But in any event, there are MGTOW people that take that view and say, I don't care what happens to society, I'm just going to do my own thing. And that to me is fine. That's a fine view to have, and it's kind of more realistic. The view that MGTOW is a fix, that if enough men do it, it's going to change society in a good way that will make a person not want to be MGTOW. I don't think that that's true. I don't think the evidence really bears that conclusion.
I agree with you. The numbers, as you point out in the blog, most men are never going to be de facto or otherwise. Most men want to have sex. They're strongly drawn to women. Most men, you see this. You have men who remarry 5 or 6 times and never learn their lesson.
Absolutely.
It's just the way most men are wired.
We have to think as human beings, we're biological creatures. We're not blank slate. We're not tabula rasa that can be conditioned into some perfect automaton. We have to work with the hardware and the software that nature has endowed us with, and it includes certain proclivities and prerogatives. And so the population of men who would actually choose to become MGTOW is very small. And even if it grew by an order of magnitude, I don't think it wouldn't be enough to really change the behavior of women. I mean, women as a group would probably just replace them with either the state paying for their children or foreign men. And as I indicated in a later point, it's not all groups of men equally attracted to MGTOW.
Yeah.
We can move on.
Yeah, definitely. So 4, it is indicative of a culture selecting against its own survival. And here you talk about fitness as the gold standard, nature's gold standard.
Right.
Fitness being reproduction.
Right. Nature is sort of unbiased and impassive about this. What matters over time is what gets passed on, and what doesn't is sort of irrelevant. And people with children kind of understand this more implicitly. Like, we as a species, we are the product of hundreds of millions of years of genes and traits being passed along from all kinds of things, from single cell life forms to more complex. And throughout that time, the vast majority of animal species have gone extinct. 99%. Humans probably won't be an exception. And at the level even within humans, individual populations, individual civilizations, the only thing that matters is what gets passed on and what doesn't. And if a society creates a culture that encourages people to not reproduce, to just live their lives and just die, or to only have a few children, such that you're well below the replacement rate, then gradually one of two things. Oh, sorry. My chair just kind of messed up. Gradually, one of two things will start to happen. Either the population will just shrink and shrink and shrink, or that culture may displace itself by trying to replace people with foreign populations, with immigrants to take over for the natives that aren't reproducing. So the problem you have is in Western countries there are a lot of maladaptive cultural practices. There are a lot of things that have discouraged reproduction, not so much reproduction also, but just family formation. And it's kind of hard to put that toothpaste back in the bottle. But that's kind of the basic point that I'm making here, that MGTOW is really a canary in a coal mine. It's a sign of a sick culture.
Possibly. I mean, again, I'm not particularly dogmatic about the label. In fact, a matter of fact, there are a lot of MGTOW that apparently, based on recent evidence, despise me as a traitor to the cause and a frothing at the mouth racist and all kinds of things.
Well, that's every community. That's every
community. I mean, they're extremists, but I mean,
they all have those kind of people.
I would agree that if it would be bad, I've said this many times, it would be bad in terms of the terms you're describing. If everyone lived their life as I do, it would be really bad because.
Okay, all right. Well, let me ask you a basic question then. Do you think a healthy society, a healthy culture, would have MGTOWs?
Probably not in the numbers they do. Again, I would have been. I'm a freak, so I would have been probably the way I am, irrespective.
So hypothetically, if we lived in a culture where the marriage laws were totally equitable, family formation was really strong.
I think you would have much fewer.
Yeah, if
I'd agree.
No, I'm talking about you personally.
Me? Oh no, I have no interest in reproduction.
Even if all the legal issues were fixed tomorrow, and you had a better culture, like feminism just died tomorrow.
Well, then I would worry about heritable diseases and causing suffering to my children. I wouldn't just blindly reproduce and think that.
Well, I don't want to get into any personal stuff, but I'm saying if hypothetically we had the right cultural and legal environment, you personally still wouldn't be interested in forming a family.
Correct. I would not be.
I think a lot of the people who identify as MGTOW would.
I agree. I absolutely agree. I've known many men who. Yeah.
Healthy. That's why I say it's a sign of an unhealthy culture.
Well, I agree. Again, I am a freak. I'm not normal. I'm an aberration in most ways.
Sure.
So I do not.
Sure.
I'm neither a role model nor should I be. It's just
you're not represented.
I agree with you broadly that the numbers you see in MGTOW communities online, or people who identify, or at least de facto, that they would drop significantly if the culture were different. I agree, because most men want to shack up with women and replicate their DNA. I get that. Even though I'm not interested myself.
I mean, I don't know if you've read Selfish Gene, but I mean that's the basic theory, is that where all of our drives and culture and motivations at root are just the goal to pass on genes.
Well, no, I've read the Selfish Gene, and I agree with that. I think that. I mean, it's a bit of a tangent, but I do think it's important for individuals to consider the consequences, though. To blindly reproduce and say you have children who have heritable diseases that cause them suffering just because you wanted to knock out your DNA. First, that's dysgenic. So, for example, I'm very much of the mind that if I were to reproduce, it would be highly dysgenic in most relevant ways. So
that's funny, because I guess privately I mentioned this to you. The thing is, I still think you are a perfect example of why IQ correlates negatively with fertility. Because a less intelligent person wouldn't even have any concept of what's dysgenic or what's not. They wouldn't care about, I have some disease that I might pass on. They would just be like, I like to have sex, I like women, I'm going to do it. Oh, there's a kid, dang. There wouldn't be any
I agree with you that being aware of these things correlates with, but nonetheless, I think it's something that I'm concerned about human suffering on some level, and
Okay, kind of do.
not having serious, increasingly serious health issues as I get older, mostly tied to chronic insomnia,
Yeah.
but a few other things. And that's a
Yeah.
heritable thing. That's highly heritable. So it's not
No,
something
I
I want to
understand.
pass on to my children if I were to have children.
I
But
understand.
anyway, but I
I
agree with you
understand.
broadly. Yes, in a different society, most men would shack
Yeah.
up and have children. I don't know how many, but they would have children
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, I understand. I understand where you're coming from. We don't have to dig into all your personal stuff, but I would just sort of ask your hypothetical future child when he's 20 years old and he has chronic insomnia, would you prefer not existing? That's the thing.
I
This-
see. I don't want to get. I think that's a serious question. That I think that suffering. I don't want to turn this into a discussion or a debate about.
the properness of having children, right? That's fine. We don't have to
Yeah,
get into-
about antinatalism, because I'm not really an antinatalist. I understand both
Yeah.
perspectives. I'm saying that
Yeah.
I can envision a world where your concern about human suffering is so great that you would really take into consideration these things. But I can also envision the world, or not even envision, I can observe the world where most people, as you pointed out, just think, I'm going to stick my dick in that man and just get on with business. I see it all the time.
Most kids are created. That's how most kids are created. But it sounds like you remind me of Rust from True Detective. I don't know if you ever watched that.
I'm not a big TV guy, but if you enlighten me.
You should watch it. You should watch it. There's a great scene where he talks about how humans are too self-aware and, it's an aberration of nature, basically. We should all just walk into our own extinction. But I think he's right about being too self-aware leads to misery, leads to suffering.
Okay, but point number 5, I think a lot of people... I'm not going to take issue because I'll defer to you in your observations here, because otherwise you wouldn't have written it. But
this is the hottest.
everyone,
This is the hottest one.
everyone, get ready and make sure you're tied to the starboard bow and you're not going to go overboard.
Sure.
5, it's a white people thing.
MGTOW is a white people thing. I mean, come on. Is this really debatable? I mean, it is a white people.
Well,
Absolutely
I would
is.
argue that they're variations. Have you ever heard of Ibmore?
Ibmore. Who is Ibmore?
Ibmore, if I recall, and I'm old and tired, but Ibmore stands for Intelligent Black Men of Reform, which apparently was some breaking away from MGTOW because MGTOW was deemed to be too white, which I suppose supports your...
It supports my whole point, and the fact that I'm black and involved in social movements and have never heard of this supports my point that this is a white people thing. And I don't say that to denigrate it. It's not a dig at white people. I don't have an issue there. But culturally, this self-awareness, this idea of we're going to form this very passive movement where we sit on our hands and wait for women in society to fix itself, it's not in line with other ethnicities that are less individualist, that are less... See, MGTOW is a very individualist kind of thing. It's like, I am going to suffer in a marriage. I don't really care about my country. I don't care about my race. I don't care about any of those broader abstractions. I care about myself. And because I'm going to suffer, I'm going to sit it out until things get better.
Well,
whereas
Renegade,
other...
Can I ask
Sorry?
a question? Are you tacitly implying that white people are more individualists than other types of people?
Their cultures are. Their cultures certainly are. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely they are. And you see this mass... You see... In Western societies, non-white minorities tend to act more collectively. For example, in the United States, they tend to vote in a block a lot more than whites do. Blacks vote as a block. Asians tend to vote as a block. Hispanics, there's some headway with Hispanics and Republicans lately, but that's partly because Hispanics are becoming a lot more white in the United States. They're identifying as white in censuses. The second and third generations are marrying to ethnic whites, and so that the Hispanic is sort of quote-unquote in the United States. But in most white countries, majority white countries, minority populations act more collectively than whites do in terms of voting behavior, in terms of economic behavior, in terms of their beliefs, cultural practices. So they are, I think, measurably less individualist in their thinking and in their attitudes than whites are. And because of that, you don't see, again, this is anecdotal, it's my observation, what I've seen on YouTube and people I've interacted with, you just don't see as many like black or Hispanic or even Asian guys consciously getting into the MGTOW movement, partly because they have cultural pressure to marry and to have families. They might have religious pressure. They might have pressure from their communities or from their families to try to do things, to try to form a family of their own. Whereas whites, as I've said, they're more atomized, they're more individualistic. Now, I did address one common objection to this, which is the Japanese grass eater phenomenon, the herbivore social kukeidanshi. And the point I made there is that I don't think that they're analogous to MGTOW. And I know a lot of these guys. I know a lot of Japanese grass eater guys. I've worked with them in Japanese offices. They do not have an issue with the legal system in Japan. In fact, if you know a little bit about the divorce laws of Japan, they're not nearly as bad as in the States. For example, if you have a child and you get married and you get divorced, there's no law that can compel you to pay child support. You can literally just leave and not do anything. So they're not like mad about the laws, and they're not mad about women really either, because feminism isn't much of a thing in Japan. The most feministic thing about Japan of the last 40, 50 years is that more women are working. So there's more women in offices. So that has affected hypergamy. It has made women more picky. I think that's certainly true in Japan. But even these like grass eater, vegetarian, herbivore men, when you talk to them about why they're not dating women, it's not, women are so annoying, or the legal system's unfair. It's more just like, I have no idea how to talk to a woman, and I like playing video games, and there's tons of porn, so why bother? It's more like they just don't give a shit. They're just totally disengaged.
They're apathetic.
They don't care. They're apathetic, and I think that's different from MGTOW. MGTOW people are very invested. They're very emotional. They have strong views.
I suppose that's true. I don't have a lot of traffic with some of the more vocal ones, so I couldn't say.
I mean, there's individuals. People can disagree. I mean, there are some MGTOW who probably would characterize themselves as apathetic.
I'm very apathetic about female kind, I have to say. But yeah.
Sure. What you see with these grass eater guys is that they tend to treat women great. Like in offices, they tend to help them out a lot, and they're very chivalrous, and they have sisters and female friends that they're super nice to, but they just don't have any romantic motivation at all.
Well, I think there's no reason to be discourteous to either men or women. I think part of a polite society is showing common decency. But I mean,
sure. And I'm not trying to imply that MGTOW are hostile toward women. I mean, that's a common.
Well, no, a lot of them are actually. A lot of them think you should go out of your way to be mean. I've never been of
Black Knight.
View. But
the Black Knight thing. Yeah, and I see both sides of that too. I'm just pointing out that, again, with the Japanese guys who are in this sort of herbivore movement, they don't really have hang-ups about women. They don't have hang-ups about their legal system. They're just apathetic. They just don't care.
Interesting. The point number 6, of course. Point number 6, MGTOW won't have much effect until higher status men start joining.
Yes. I couldn't give exact numbers, but one of the points I made is that there is a hierarchy among men,
of course,
and among women to an extent. It's a little different, but there is a hierarchy, and it's implicit, and it's not nice to talk about, but most men intuitively understand their rough relative position on the hierarchy. And as long as men from the top up to a certain point are still pursuing women, women overall won't really care about MGTOW. They won't care that there's some population of guys who have dropped out. And from my observation, if we think in terms of percentiles, MGTOW is mostly made up of the bottom 25th percentile or so. It's very rare that you get higher status men, attractive, wealthy, intelligent, good qualities, 80th, 90th percentile men who say, you know what, I'm going to go MGTOW. Because these guys have options. They've got options. They have the ability to attract specifically the type of woman they want. They have a lot of self-esteem and self-respect. They feel like, marriage might be a little thorny, but I can figure out a way to navigate it. I can find a way to do it.
With that said, it goes without saying that even these men are subject to the rules of the system. Yeah.
Oh, look at Brad Pitt, right? Yeah. Of course. I mean, no one gets away completely. But they're willing to take the risk. They're willing to take the risk. So I think when you start to see increasingly higher percentile men get into MGTOW in large numbers, then you'll start seeing more people care about it.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely true, I think, to some degree. I mean, I can really only speak for myself, but I think at best I'm middle status. I don't think I'd
Yeah.
ever be in the category. I'm neither intelligent nor handsome enough to be, something 90. Who's in the 90th percentile anyway? I mean,
Well, intelligence is not the main thing. You strike me as at least a standard deviation or two up on terms of IQ. I'm gauging that just on your verbal ability. But intelligence is a proxy for wealth generation. So
Yeah.
women in general aren't attracted directly to
Oh,
intelligence.
I agree.
Some are.
They don't give a shit
usually
about it.
aren't.
They care about money.
Yeah. They're attracted to intelligence if they get the sense like, oh, this guy's probably, a six-figure software developer. Oh, he's probably got a business.
Yeah,
then
I
they're
know.
attracted.
I'm
But if you're
cute.
just a
I've made videos. Yes,
Right, you know
women
this.
don't care about intelligence. They care about what intelligence can do for them in
Yes,
terms of
yes.
resources. Yeah.
I think that's generally true, and that's I've made peace with that. It's not really a dig at women. Men are also attracted to unfair, superficial things. But the point is, your role, your position on the hierarchy, to the extent that's easily quantifiable, is a function of a few different things. And one of the biggest things is going to be wealth generation and capacity for wealth generation.
Attractiveness is a huge factor as well.
Initially, especially for younger women. Once you get to slightly older women, late 20s or 30s, physical attractiveness is less important. They start thinking more in terms of security. So it's sort of, this is something you've probably addressed, but the hierarchy changes over time with age, and men and women kind of invert once they get into their 30s. It becomes a lot harder for women as they get older because men value youth a lot. And for most men, it becomes a little easier as they get more established in their career. So that's another part of it.
That's true. Okay, so 7, middle status men are increasingly outsourcing to foreign women. And this is very observable.
Yeah, clearly. And this is not directly
Thailand, the Philippines, China.
Yep. Yeah, and there have been some interesting videos I've seen on this in I think it's either Sweden or somewhere. I think it's Sweden. I saw something about a feminist politician wanting to change the visa requirements for women from Thailand because there's just so many men importing these Thai wives, and they're trying to crack down on it because they don't want to.
Well, dude, it goes even further. You want to hear something completely funky?
Sure.
But have you ever heard of the Faroese Islands?
I think I've heard the name, yes.
The Faroese Islands are an ancient Nordic culture. Their language is extremely archaic. They're basically a bunch of white Vikings that have lived in isolation for over 1,000 years. Now,
cool.
Even their men are importing foreign brides.
Wow.
So
really?
Yeah.
That bad?
Yeah, I watched a documentary. I double check. I mean, they have men who are looking at Filipino wives, and because you would imagine a society that small, and this is the Faroese, that because of the way hypergamy works and the way the 80-20 works, that more men will be naturally cut out of that because there's such a small pickings for women in terms of there are not many men, so you're only going to go for the top 20% anyway, and the rest of them are just cut out. So it's pretty interesting.
It is surprising.
Yeah. But I've seen this happen. A lot of men get tricked by this, though, because one thing I've tried to drive home throughout the years is that women are always women no matter where they come from. There's a basic biological set of behaviors that's observable. And
right, sure.
There's this idea that if you meet some quote-unquote sweet woman from Thailand, you take her to Canada, and then boom, it's different. Many a man has met his fate in the divorce court
They acculturate, This is a thing that's been observed in social science studies of men and women, that women tend to be more risk averse, and they tend to be more conformist. So they care a lot about social approval. So if you take a foreign woman into a Western country, she's going to acculturate. She's going to adapt to that society. And eventually, if you're in a place where divorce is very normalized, where more sort of feminist kind of aggressive paradigm is more normalized for them, then it's not like it's an automatic fix marrying a foreign woman. You'd be better off if you were to move to a foreign country. then you might have a better chance.
Well, actually, anecdotal example. This was years ago. I think early 2010s in that year bracket. But there was a guy from California who just said, "Screw it all." He left for the Philippines, taught himself Tagalog, I believe.
Tagalog, I believe.
The Polynesian language that's spoken there, and settled down in some shithole village with some woman and has never left, basically. And
really?
I think she popped out 3 kids, maybe 4, and he started a kind of local business. And he doesn't really leave the Philippines apart from business, and he just stays there. And the reason he cited is that he would never bring her back to California, the States, because he knows that she would divorce him probably. So she just keeps him there, and it seems to have worked out for him. And a divorce is illegal in the Philippines as well. So.
Yeah, interesting. I think they have more strict requirements around divorce, but
it's a very Catholic country. So
it is. That seems a little extreme to me. I mean, it's. I think.
What, isn't he doing what you view as virtuous? As he's inseminating women and reproducing and having a family? Isn't that what the thing that's?
Well, it's a little bit of a leap from what we've talked about to say that I think that's virtuous.
Okay, that was my impression that you regarded that as something ethical or virtuous. Maybe I'm misinterpreting.
Well, my industry, my startup, is related to marriage matchmaking because I believe in the importance of families for creating ideal societies. I think societies that abandon nuclear families and try to adopt sort of the tournament mating or polygynous.
Well, I think he does have a nuclear family. He just happens to live in the Philippines, and he doesn't leave the place.
Yeah. So I guess the short version, my assessment of that particular case, is mostly positive. I think it's fine to become an immigrant and to move into another culture. And I actually think when you move into, if you are committed to move to another country and live there permanently, I think it's better to marry into that ethnicity, assuming it's an ethnically homogenous country, rather than attempt to maintain a foreign bloodline. Like if you're a black couple moving to Japan.
Well, and there are good historical. I mean, I think when you, I agree with you because there's good historical evidence that minority groups that persist as minority groups, this creates a lot of tension.
That's one reason.
Historically, this is well documented in both Europe and Southeast Asia. That's one reason. And it probably, you're the guy who's the outsider, so you might as well conform. It's.
Yeah, exactly. Among foreigners I see in Japan, the ones that have Japanese wives tend to acclimate a little better. There's a perception that they have skin in the game, that they're really more invested in the culture. Yeah. Their kids are Japanese; they have to learn the language. So I do think if you're committed to being immigrant, it's better to marry into that culture if you can. So what your friend did, I have no.
He wasn't my friend. He was a guy I used to talk to.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Right. Your acquaintance.
Yeah.
That sounds fine to me. I don't really have an objection to it. But when I say it, I think it's a little bit extreme. I don't think it's the case that you absolutely have to keep your wife outside of a Western country because she's going to immediately divorce you. I think that's a bit much, unless you're married to a complete scam artist. I don't think that's really the case. So,
okay, number 8. It may be eugenic, and I have to just read this because you actually cite Varg of all people, but hey. Thulean Perspective, the great intellectual of our time.
Right.
The woodsman.
He's amazing. His channel is great. He's great. I just feel like
you must mean that ironically.
Well, it's entertaining,
yes. These short snippets with the Nordic drums in the background. Yeah, it's funny.
Intense. I love it. He had a very hot take on MGTOW. He thought it was a great movement because it would basically weed out weak, pathetic, shitty men. And I tried to unpack that a little bit and say, okay, well, if these men are not breeding, it's only eugenic if it's getting rid of things that we don't want to pass on. And so we have to try to identify this population a little bit better. And the point I made is that the self-identifying MGTOW that I've spoken with, they tend to be, pretty decent guys in terms of intelligence. They tend to be pretty smart. The ones who've thought about social issues enough to get to the point where they've discovered this this community and they identify with it. So I don't think it's necessarily eugenic in terms of increasing the IQ of the society to the extent that IQ is the one thing we care about. There are other traits that go into eugenics.
Right.
But when you factor in the larger population of de facto MGTOW, the just 25th percentile and lower guys who are having trouble finding a female partner, then you could argue there's something eugenic about it, because it's it might be a more equitable and stable civilization that allows all men to get married and have families, but it's not the most eugenic.
They're separate things, clearly.
Yes, they're separate priorities, and some people, I mean, they're even alt-right people, I've heard Tara McCarthy suggest this, that we need to find a way to pass on better genes, and that might require, if not polygamy, some kind of social normalization of letting higher status men have children with multiple women, and preventing lower status men, maybe even sterilizing lower status men, as some countries have done.
Not my view. This is his view. Every time I talk to somebody, it's the accusation is that I'm having a conversation with somebody. I'm not advocating this. This is what he's saying.
I'm not advocating sterilization either, to be clear. I'm trying to explain how MGTOW could be seen as a eugenic thing, how it could improve the gene pool. I don't advocate sterilization. In terms of that conflict between a society where everyone can get married and have families, or a society where only the fit can have families and have children, I'm very strongly on the side of the former. I do think it would be good to incentivize higher IQ, smarter people, more fit people to have more kids. I think it would be great if we could find a way to, I don't know how to do this, but it'd be great if we could find a way to make IQ correlate positively with fertility.
I have some ideas, but people aren't going to like them. The fact of the matter is, and this is not what I want. I'm just saying that if you want to get things done, there are a number of things you could do.
I'd be interested to hear. What is your idea?
Well, number one, I'm sure you've heard the term gynocentrism, right?
Of course, yeah.
Human beings are naturally, I think, gynocentric. We tend to treat women better than men. Yeah.
Because of our reproduction.
Yeah. This is a very simplified way of putting it, but you got to be meaner to women. You got to stop
meaner to women
in the sense of you need to stop caving into. I mean, for example, women feel increasingly they're entitled to everything and every type of man. This is amplified by media. It's been amplified by technology.
Expectations are higher, sure.
Expectations are higher. You got to. I think that if you want more men to participate, who are would see slightly eugenic, 6s or 7s or whatever, you got to stop denying them opportunities because resources are being passed on to women so they can study basket weaving or whatever. Yeah, there needs to be fewer funds, less money, and frankly speaking, I think this is the tricky part, less kindness given to women as a de facto position. Okay, yeah.
I think what you're kind of circling around is sort of restricting women's
mobility,
social mobility, women's rights to some extent.
Yes.
So yeah, the easiest way to have pure eugenics, absolutely, is to not educate women at all, because in terms of IQ, there's more variation at the higher ends among men. Women are more clustered in the middle. So if you had a society where you could just say to high IQ guys, okay, we're going to just throw 5 women at you, we don't care what they think, then yeah, I mean, if you throw out the question of rights, then eugenics becomes very easy. So what you're describing of just like not being nice maybe is a softer version of that. Maybe
it certainly would
expectations. Be, yeah. What I'm saying is, how do you create a culture where IQ correlates positively with fertility and people have rights, including women, ideally?
I don't think you do. And I think if you look at the globe, as you know, as a denizen of Japan, and look at the highly developed East Asian civilizations. I mean, in
Yeah.
South Korea, the government has for decades now been offering reproductive incentives to couples, and they've been largely ineffective. So I think anytime you get a group of people that are high IQ, highly educated, living in a very sort of mechanized urban environment, they just tend to. That's just the way it works, and it's actually spreading now to other places like Iran and what have you.
So actually, there is an answer. There is an answer to this question of how to have IQ correlate positively. So first of all, what you have to do is look at some unconventional populations and look at places in the world where you have relatively high fertility and kind of outlier cultures. So one example is Israel. Israel has relatively high IQ.
And actually, it doesn't. Can I just correct? No.
It has a higher fertility rate than most of the countries around it, and has a higher IQ than most of the countries around it.
The IQ still isn't very impressive because
it's not like
the people. There are very few Ashkenazi Jews there who would bring it obviously up. It's mostly other types of Jews as well as Arabs. So
I think it's like in the 90s, right?
It's about 95 last time I checked.
Yeah, it's in the 90s, right? It's not like Ashkenazi, the Eastern European or the European diaspora Jews, but it's higher than most of the Arab countries in that area.
Yeah.
So, and they have a relatively high fertility rate. And then you look at other unconventional cultures. You look at the Amish. You look at the Mormons. You look at other religious communities where fertility is a huge part of the culture. No matter whether you're smart or dumb, it's expected that you're going to have a big family.
But Lord of Coding, that is effectively a soft tyranny. That is not freedom. That is a restriction. So we'd have to agree that restrictions are required. Yeah.
It's at the level of culture, though. It's not at the level of government, right? So that's the ideal, is to create a society where people want to form families because they believe it's the right thing to do, not where they're forced.
But I don't really see a huge difference there, whether people feel culturally forced to because of pressure, or there's a government mandate that says that they must do it. The end result is pretty much the same. Now, I'm not arguing...
Huge moral difference. I think it's a huge moral difference. I mean, haven't you ever seen the show Breaking Amish? People can leave religious cultures and communities if they so choose. There's pressure from families.
True, I suppose there is that factor. They can leave if they want to. The problem with a lot of these cultures is they tend to be very primitive, regressive, and they create other types of problems. So
they're not necessarily primitive. You're calling Mormons primitive?
Not Mormons. Mormons seem to be an exception here. But how many Mormons would get on board with evolutionary biology, though? I mean, if they could reconcile
I actually don't know enough about Mormon theology.
Okay, but
they don't believe in evolution?
Well,
maybe they don't.
No, they don't, to my knowledge. And here,
again,
I think... Okay. As you've cited Thomas Sowell before. Thomas Sowell has famously said many times,
I read him.
There are no solutions, only trade-offs. So the trade-off there would you have a very restrictive culture that might be, I'm using the term in the conventional sense, regressive, not politically regressive, but regressive and not being up to date with certain facts of science and certain just facts of the world. And also, the problem with these types of enclaves is they typically create... well, it would depend. If they're a majority culture, maybe not. But if they exist within a greater culture, the United States is a lucky place because there's religious tolerance. But you tend to have a lot of tension if they're. But I agree with you that cultural pressure can. So yeah, in South Korea,
I think it's better than legal pressure.
In South Korea, most people still feel young people, men and women, still feel pressure to get married. A lot of them don't even want to, but they feel they have no choice. They feel it's an obligation. So and I think this segues. Does it segue? 9. The activists have conflicting goals.
Yes.
So you're talking about MRAs versus MGTOW there, right?
Well, I would really like you to weigh on this because I think if we're just talking about the politically minded MGTOWs, we see it as a way to change society. I have really seen a very clear split here between the MRA types and the traditional conservative tradcon types. There seem to be MGTOWs who think that their movement is going to force women back in the kitchen and make everything back like the 1950s. And then there seem to be MGTOWs like Karen Strawn, Girl Writes What, who think that this is going to lead to equality and there'll be no more gender roles.
She's not really a MGTOW. She's not even a man. She's an MRA.
No.
In fact, that's what she describes herself as,
right.
MRA. Yeah.
Sure. But I haven't seen every single one of her videos. But in one of her videos, she did seem to come out with a very egalitarian position of, we should have exactly the same social roles for men and women. Even if that doesn't fit her, that is definitely a significant belief among kind of the MRA Voice for Men crowd.
I think that's a bit utopian. I think any sex realist would acknowledge that there.
Sure.
I mean, you can wish for things. I've been well acquainted with Karen for years. We're still on good terms, I'd like to think. I could say that Karen's perspective is more that she's very libertarian. Whatever makes people happy. If they want traditional roles, that's fine. If they want more egalitarian, that's fine. I think what she's most opposed to is the way the system is operated and run, and sort of the tyranny, the governmental tyranny from the top that's imposed on the bottom.
Sure.
But I mean, let's be honest. We're never going to get women to not even agree to do these types of things. Women aren't going to become, lumberjacks operating power saws, and they're not going to be. I mean, women are they're less capable than men are. On average, they're less intelligent, and they're not good for the same things, and things that
they're different. They're different.
Well, I think you're mincing words to defend them, but on every objective measure, and even in terms of IQ, yes, they have different distributions, but even on average, the average mean is still higher in men than women.
Yeah, so, I saw that study. Yeah, that's true. But it's like 2 points, although that is significant, but it's not dramatic.
But also in terms of biology and physiology, men are more motivated to do things that change the world. So this idea, I think it's a pipe dream. You're not going to get women out there to do difficult labor or complex labor, because most of them, not all of them, most of them are either unwilling or incapable or both. So I just don't see I mean, it's a pipe dream. I don't know. It's just well-wishing that will never come true, in my mind, at least.
Yeah, I do agree. I think men and women are very different, and there are different proclivities, there's different capacities. Obviously, we're different physically. We can't expect. This is a criticism I've had of feminism, which is like, it doesn't make sense to tell women to have the exact same career track as men, to compete with men in the same terms as them, when they don't have the same fertility, right? They have a fertility window that's much smaller than men.
What you mean is that, yes, and they have a different reproductive strategy. A woman does not benefit from making lots of money and be in high status. She benefits from looking really good.
Sure. To a large extent, I think that's true. Although I would argue that I think there's an increasing population of sort of middle status men who like the idea of their wife working and bringing home some of the paycheck. And I think for higher status men, that's very true. They don't care about their wives' jobs. They don't care about their degree. That's just like, I'm the alpha, I'm going to do my thing, and it just has to be pretty. But I think basically my main criticism of feminism is pretending that there are no differences between men and women disadvantages women a lot. And if you say to them, you should have the same career trajectory as men, you should spend all of your fertile years working and studying, competing with men, and then when you're less fertile and in general less attractive, then you should try to find the father of your kids, your husband. It doesn't make sense. It's an unfair competition between men and women to do that. And it's like, a one-legged person running in a race against someone with two legs. It's just unfair. So I do agree that trying to create a society where men and women are identical, have the same social behavior, is kind of foolish.
It's never going to happen, ever.
It's foolish just because of the visible sex differences in size and reproductive. These are very obvious things.
But also inclination. I mean, I'm sure you heard of the sort of the Nordic experiment where in places like Norway, which are cited as some of the most egalitarian, it's called the Nordic paradox, places in the world.
I know. Yeah,
you get even stronger pulls in one direction, where women
more traditional.
Exactly.
More traditional gender roles, and what you see in less egalitarian places like India and the Middle East, you see actually a lot of women going into STEM fields.
Because necessity is the mother of all invention, and you're forced to. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the book I cited earlier, The Delusion of Gender, Cordelia Fine's book, she talks a little bit about this, and I think there's a lot. It's significant, the ramifications.
She sounds familiar. Is she an Israeli?
I don't think so. I feel like her book cited.
What's her name?
Cordelia Fine.
Actually, that's a Jewish name. So
yeah, Cordelia Fine. I think her book cited University of Melbourne or something like that.
Interesting.
So I guess Australian.
But I see. I just looked up her bio a bit. She's English. Okay.
English. Okay.
Yeah, but again, you can't just discount the evidence that's right in front of your nose, right?
So yeah, I mean, I've mentioning her book. I've read a lot of books on gender lately. Her book is arguing against biological behavioral differences. And I read hers, I read Pinker's book on sexual paradox, Why Gender Matters, Male Brain, Female Brain. And you keep coming to this question of inherent differences and creating an egalitarian society. And I just think, even if we don't factor in the brain and the behavior, just the obvious physical differences make that not probable. If you get into the more controversial stuff, the evo-psych stuff, then it gets even worse. I mean, there's all of these really politically incorrect sort of dark instincts that come about when we think about our evolved nature, when we think about the fact that most human pair bonding has been non-consensual and coercive.
Well, hold on a second. I don't think that's accurate. I don't think most human pair bonding is the result of rape.
No. When I say non-consensual and coercive, I don't mean rape. I mean arranged by outside forces.
Oh, yes.
The paradigm we have now of freely chosen partners.
Well, this is my thing, and I think this would be really helpful. I think we're stuck here in terms of human beings with a bit of a paradox. On the one hand, humans seem to be only moved by emotion and feeling, largely. I wouldn't say only, largely.
Yeah.
But let's be honest, as you pointed out, historically, love had very little to do with reproduction. There were convenient arrangements. Yeah. And I don't even think modern marriage I think modern marriage should be what it's always been, a business contract between two people who've decided to replicate their DNA. And I think love shouldn't really be part of that necessarily. I mean, if it's there or whatever, but the feelings don't really matter. It's a business arrangement. Yeah. That's why it should be a contract. I think it should be a contract people agree to and conform to. Yeah. But on the other hand, people are moved by emotions. So they say, well, why should I copulate with this guy and be married to this guy to, it's a bit of, because you can't, getting people to sort of mechanistically reproduce, which may be the best thing in some sense, it's anathema to their inner feelings and the way they feel motivated in their lives, right? Yeah,
and I think there's a bit of a false dichotomy there. I don't think it's a choice between a love-based marriage.
Well, it's not an absolute binary. It's fluid, but it's
what you see in studies of arranged marriages is actually a very high levels of contentment that actually grows over time. With arranged marriages, the ambivalence is highest at the start of the marriage, and then gradually increases as the people get to know each other. Whereas in dating, the satisfaction with the relationship is at its highest at the start, and then gradually goes down. And I think this speaks to the plasticity of human minds, that when you give people paradoxes, we find ways to make it work. We find ways to be happy. With arranged marriages, you say to someone, this person's your spouse, make it work. And with the right culture, it can work, and it can even lead to happiness, to love. People can build love.
There is some evidence in a general sense that too much choice is no choice, that the more choices you have, the less content you are. Yeah, I this is an anecdotal example, but I think it's largely applicable to human beings. I'm a big RPG gamer kind of guy. And
me too.
A game that has come out recently where I've been confronted with the possibility of over 90 different combinations in terms of class, multi-class, and what have you.
Was it Gaia or something? Jesus.
It's called Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. But
I know.
Right, so what I'm suffering from having for weeks is restart-itis. I start one multi-class and then something else. It's because there's just too much choice, frankly speaking.
Yeah, and there's a similar dilemma with choosing a romantic partner,
Yeah.
choosing a lifetime partner who's going to be the father or mother of your offspring. With when you arrange it, and you instead of trying to build a marriage from love, you try to build love from marriage. You start with the marriage and you try to build love on top of that instead of the inverse. That may be the more practical approach, because the other approach with Westerners, which is historically very new, is you say, hey, there's 7 billion people on the planet. Go find your soulmate, which is daunting. It's.
Well, I don't believe in
possible.
soulmates myself, but yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the romantic vision, and encourage people to do bad things. Encourages more promiscuity and wasted time.
I think it's a trick of artifice, and I also think it's a marketing trick. But yeah, I mean,
sure, it's good for the economy in some ways.
Yeah,
it's certainly great for the divorce industry. But,
right. Your final point, though, I think this is one that might rouse some ire in the audience, possibly. 10, in reference to MGTOW 10, it is cowardly. And you cite the famous Tyler Durden quote everybody knows: "We're the middle children of history, no purpose or place. We have no great war, no great depression. Our war is a spiritual war. Our great depressions are lives." So maybe you could talk about that.
Yes. This is probably the second hottest take after the white people thing. My criticism here is of, again, MGTOW as a movement, as a way to fix society. It's not a criticism of the complaints, because I think the complaints are valid. But the point I'm sort of making here is that there have always been complaints. Men and women, society, humans, we've always had complaints with society, with the world. And I bring this up, I talk about thinking of like my grandfather, the crazy stuff that he had to go through. I think about all of the wars, all of the diseases and colonization and slavery and plagues and violence and crazy shit that my ancestors went through, and yet somehow it all led to me sitting in front of a computer in the year 2018, and it gives me pause that they went through all of that and managed to have families and pass on their genes, that I might have the right to complain about culture and women at my computer and act like that's this implacable, undefeatable thing. And I don't agree with that. I think that it's just another obstacle. It's just the next obstacle. And I don't even think it's the worst. I think that many cultures and our species overall has dealt with far worse things than shitty marriage laws and, feminism. I think that we have to confront these issues to the extent that they're blockers to our own thriving and happiness. And I think MGTOW is the opposite of confronting it. I think it's sitting on your hands and hoping that other people will change and fix things for you. And
if you care enough for that to be fixed, I suppose. If that's your strategy, your idea, you're going to wait it out.
Well, yeah, this is for people who are thinking of it as a strategy, who are the activist class. The people who are MGTOW because they're nihilists, because they don't care about society, they're just bitter and don't give a shit, I don't really have an opinion of them. I think that
I take this term nihilism is very loosely and I think lazily thrown about the internet. I think I think it's lost its original meaning. You mean people who? I mean, because I need to ask what you mean before critiquing. What do you mean by nihilism?
When I say nihilism, I'm talking about people who openly say, I don't care about society, I don't care about the world. I just want to exist and be comfortable and be left alone. And I don't have a strong opinion. So, I mean, strictly speaking, that's not philosophical nihilism. I'm using it more colloquially as in people who just don't give a shit. But, you watch The Big Lebowski, you'll get a nice explanation of nihilism. But the point I mean is the people who are of that ilk, who are just like, I don't care about society, fuck off. I don't have much opinion of them except to say that I think the position, I don't care about society, is a childish position. I think that's a very childish position. Because everyone has to care about society.
Oh, yeah. I mean, people, I don't know, I mean, the accusation I'll get is I don't care about society because I'm not getting married and reproducing. But there are other ways you can care about society and participate and be concerned about things.
You can. Absolutely you can.
I'm very concerned about what is going on in the world. I mean, my channel at the end of the day is basically about human sociobiology, so I'm very concerned about all kinds of things. But I think I find that personally unrelatable, but people tick in different ways, and I'm sure the people who don't give a shit have their reasons.
I'm sure they do. The point I'm making, though, is that we can only wash our hands of these people to a certain extent. This libertarian idea of just leave everyone alone, and whatever they do behind closed doors doesn't matter. It's just false. It's just not true. If you have a large population of people that don't have children, that don't form families, there are economic consequences, there are demographic consequences that lead to political consequences, that lead to huge impact on the future of your culture and of your society. One obvious one, which you're seeing in Western countries with the EU, is that, hey, there aren't enough kids. Let's just import a whole lot of third worlders, right? That'll fix everything. And now your culture is gradually being replaced or diluted because of all of these individualists saying, I don't care about society, I'm going to do my own thing. So, I agree to an extent. Yes, there's always going to be infertile people.
I don't disagree with you, but I can't help but think, you're very fortunate in your capacities. You were born with enormous cognitive capacity that's allowed you to perform and achieve a great deal.
Okay. Yeah, me personally maybe, but I think even for normal persons or people below the 50%, however you want to rank people, first of all, in a healthy society, as I say, I think pretty much everyone should be able to have a family and try to
not just people in your category.
No, not just people in my category. Look, I've been blessed. I work from home. I do a variety of consulting work, and I earn a lot. I'm not going to say any numbers, but I do well.
You make a lot of money. You're clearly very intelligent.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yes. I'm blessed by my circumstances, in terms of IQ and income. I'm in the higher percentiles, but that doesn't mean that only people in my situation have the ability to have.
Well,
families.
Increasingly that is the case, I think, and that's what you're maybe.
The culture has made it harder. But this is the war. This is the thing that we have to fight. If we choose not to confront it, we sacrifice the future. We sacrifice everything that the people before us fought for.
Well, I mean, you can get lost in legacy, and I can have an appreciation for legacy. I think, this is a somewhat tangential issue, but as a person of the Occident, I think throwing away thousands of years of European history and saying it's just a bunch of bad white men who did bad things is not only is it asinine, it's intellectually dishonest.
Have you ever read Marcus Aurelius?
Sure.
Meditations of Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah.
I read it again very recently, and I was surprised by how repetitive he is, how much he just kind of rambles. And I sort of pithily wrote on my blog, here's a short version of the Meditations. Life is very, very short. You are going to die very soon and live a decent life. That's it. That's basically all he said.
I agree. That's what he basically wrote. I agree.
Right. And keeping that in mind, another part of that is the idea of legacy. Because life is very short, we have to think about future generations because they thought about us. And those societies that are the most successful are the ones, like the Italian saying, I believe it's Italian, the quality of a city is measured in the number of old men who plant trees that they'll never sit under. The idea that if we have a culture where people care about their posterity, care about the future, care about people they'll never even meet, then those are the best cultures. Whereas the cultures that are made up of individualists who only care about themselves, who only care about the next 5 years, not only are they terrible as voters, they're terrible political actors. They're extremely easily manipulated.
I would broadly agree, but I suppose I take some issue. I'm somewhere in the middle. I agree that hyper-individualist cultures tend to produce those results, but
they're also disposable. They don't last. They don't have the ability to produce any kind of endurance. And again, as a nihilist, you have a right to not care about any of this. But I don't think that that's the proper sort of society to create, to the extent that we care about the type of society we create.
Well, and I do actually care about, and this is kind of my objection to merely reproducing, and we briefly and privately talked about the Great Filter. I think the Great Filter is still ahead of us. I don't think we...
Oh, I think so.
Right. Yep. And if there's any indication out there, it's that, we're not going to make it. And I would like
Yeah.
a society that does more than just pops babies out and takes into account some of these long-term challenges of if it's even, I mean, everything exists in a state of probability. There are no absolute. Well, I'm not going to make. Probably there are no absolutes. So
That's a funny sentence. Probably
right.
there are no absolutes.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah. But in as much as the Great Filter is a probabilistic barrier, we need to do. Ideally, if we want to get past the Great Filter, we need to take measures that will increase our probability of surpassing it and bypassing it. And I think we're lost at sea when it comes to this. And
yeah, I think so. Sure, I think that's true. I think
if we want to have a legacy it's not enough just to my mind, because as you know, DNA gets 10 generations on, you're not even related to your descendants. So that's not enough. We need to have a vision that, and this is the former transhumanist in me, which I say former because I've been very disillusioned, but that moves beyond even just the next 10 years or in the 50 years, but how are things going to look in the next 100 and 200 years?
Right.
And I agree with you in that sense. In the individual thing, it doesn't work. But also just even the limit, because we didn't evolve to think in long term. So 30 years is a challenge. 50. We have to think about, do we want to even be here as a species 1,000 years from now? Because
there's a bigger question you're not even asking, though. There's another bigger question related to that, which is, if we're here 1,000 years from now, are we even going to be the same species?
Well, I think that's less material. I mean,
live as Homo sapiens.
Well, so if we want to get very specific, I am very concerned with the continuity of developed consciousness, which means it doesn't have to be us necessarily, Homo sapiens. It can be some offshoot. It doesn't matter to me necessarily.
Or like AI, our machines could be our legacy. Right?
Yeah, I would be cool with that. I mean, a lot of people take issue with that. Somebody, I know this dastardly debater online who tried to concede that I was somehow a murderer. This is a thought experiment I'll offer to you. It's a bit tangential, but so you have a particle replicator that is effectively a teleporter. But in actuality, the end product, when you get teleported some distance, is not you. It's just a perfect replication.
Right, the Star Trek transporter problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I conceded that as I'm more concerned with the continuity of highly developed consciousness, I would be okay with disintegrating myself. And then he said, "Oh, you're a murderer." Now, okay, that might be the case, but I think that in general we should be concerned with the preservation of advanced civilization. And I agree with you that the things we're doing now are highly dysgenic. They're highly disruptive towards that. I don't think being an individual is the best way of working towards that. But just getting people to pop out babies, and I think that's why I'm critical of the alt-right. They have a very short-term vision. They want to, revel in the glory of the past and close the borders. Okay, but there's a bigger picture at stake.
They want white people to get in on the whole ethnostate thing. That's what they want.
That is I think that's too short-term, frankly speaking.
Well, their concern is that they're being demographically displaced. That's their concern. And
that's probably accurate, though. I agree.
If we take the very long game of humanity, thousands of years from now, ethnicities might not matter, right? If everyone is.
Well, you pointed out in your discussion with JF, and this is a great mystery very early on, that we don't know why civilizations rise and fall. We really don't. I mean, we have some ideas. People, this is why I don't buy into, I'm sure your cold winter theory, I don't buy into that, because where is the cradle of civilizations in Mesopotamia with the Sumerians? There was a tremendous civilization in the Indus Valley in western India. These things come and go. We don't know exactly why. But long term, and this is just my opinion and my own preference, we should have our eyes focused on what's going to preserve advanced civilization and move us forward, push the envelope forward. And if it happens to be some kind of ethnocentrism, which I'm not, or ethnocentrically based dogma, I'm not entirely sold on that. If somebody provides the evidence, I would be more sold on it. But okay, fair enough. But I'm not sure about that. So I don't know.
Yeah, you kind of threw a lot of things out there, but I guess I think we'll probably wind down this conversation pretty soon. It's getting kind of long.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. If you want to go, that's fine. I did.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you
comment
about
on some of what you said.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a separate session.
Mm-hmm.
It would it be tolerable, or would you prefer to go if I inquired after your Christianity, or is that?
I can briefly comment on it if you like. I want to comment a little bit on what you said. Just a little
okay.
while
Well, why don't you comment on what I said instead? Okay.
Yeah. Again, about the long game. How far out are we thinking? I think it sort of doesn't make sense to think too far out. You're saying it's too short term, but it kind of doesn't make sense to worry about 500 years, 1,000 years from now, because it'll be whatever it is. There's no way we can imagine it now, and so the only thing that really makes sense to focus on is the next few generations that we sort of can perceive. Most people can't really think beyond, say, 3, maybe at most 4 generations from beyond their own lifespan. There are people who are old enough to become great grandparents and actually meet their great grandkids, which is I'm sure is very cool. Beyond that, it's very hard. It's very hard to even imagine anything. So one thing I will say about humanity broadly is that I think we benefit from having biological diversity. I don't think we would be better off if we were all mixed together as one kind of beige race. I think that would lead to a tendency toward more world government, which I'm very strongly against. I think world government is stagnation. It's sort of an end of history. I think we need people to be able to vote with their feet and experiment with different political systems, different economic systems. So we need to maintain some pluralism. We need to maintain some ethnic diversity and cultural diversity. So to that end, I think there is a logic to the alt-right. I think it's one of the positives of the movement, having a more open conversation about nationalism. My time living in Japan has really shown me, what the value can be in having a productive and ethnically homogenous, peaceful society. And I think it's good if some nations experiment with multiculturalism to see it work. And I think it's also good if some or most nations don't. So that's sort of my basic view on the few things you brought up there.
All right, I won't keep you any longer. It seems like you need to go.
I can comment very briefly about the Christianity thing, and then if you want, I'm happy to do a follow-up.
Well, we can just cut it now and introduce some later. It's up to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll comment briefly on it, and another time we can dig in more. I am Christian, and I wasn't always. I was an atheist when I was younger. Like I said, I went through a very edgy libertarian phase when I was in college. And without going into detail, life experiences made me question my atheism. And then studying computer science and more anthropology and history led me to conclude that theism is a more rational position. It's more probable to me that there is a creator of some kind than that there isn't. In fact, I also think it's very probable that we live in some kind of simulation. I think Elon Musk might be right about that. But that's a separate thing. Whatever you think the creator is, whether it's some program or some metaphysical or spiritual thing, I think it's more probable that there's some kind of creator and creating agent than that there isn't one. And Christianity I adopted more for cultural reasons and moral reasons. There's a lot of value in the Bible. There's a lot of madness in the Bible too. There's a lot of violence and crazy incest stuff. But if you actually read the Bible and read the teachings of Jesus, there's a lot that's good there. And so my belief that there is likely a God, and my belief in the particular values, or at least most of the particular values of Christianity, has led me to adopt that identity. I'm not like a missionary or anything. I don't go to church very often. I'm still kind of locking down the denomination, talking to people and reading more about it. But yeah, that's sort of where I am spiritually in terms of religion.
Okay. All right, well, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we talked for a while. I'm happy to have you on again if I'm still alive. And
Yeah, it's just long. It's almost 2 hours. You might have to cut this into a few videos.
Well, actually, if you know me, this is not not unconventional. Actually,
Right,
so
right.
It does. They do tend to be longer. They can be. Anyway, this has been the Renegade of Funk. I will post a link to his YouTube as well as his blog. Is that acceptable? I post a link to your blog?
Yeah, of course, of course,
Yeah.
of course.
And very interesting guy. I unfortunately didn't have the time to quiz him about Japan and kanji because I have some interesting.
Oh, you know what? Let's talk again sometime. Let's do another.
Let's definitely do another talk
Sure.
on some other subjects because there's
Absolutely.
still a lot more to talk about. And
Certainly.
hope everyone enjoyed the talk. The few people due to YouTube throttling my channel that will view this talk. And it's been my pleasure to talk to you.
Yes, I've enjoyed it too. Thanks so much.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.